You better hear! You better hear! You better hear from me!
So I'm Lou. I run something called Zine Fair, which is a social project, but I also I'm an artist and have a studio and work on my own writing and sculpture and installation. But my main focus is through Zine Fair, because that's where I have a lot of my community projects and make the most consumable amount of art, I guess.
So, at the moment, we're in a time where we have a lot of access to instant communication, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that kind of thing. Do you feel that zines still have any relevance in an age of social media?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of people say, why do I bother doing zine making still? Especially those who have made them before, and they're like, oh, why are they interested now? But I found zine making as a way of making my own media. So the first zine I ever made was called Country Living. As like a jab at the actual country living, which is like women looking really pretty, like upper middle class women, buying nice things for their houses. So that was a feminist zine at Oxford Uni, and I got into that as a way to like create our own media and have our own voices, and to say like, this is actually my experience of being a woman, this is the kind of thing I want to read about and consume. And in terms of the age of social media, I feel like that's gotten worse. Like, there's definitely a way you have to look and speak, and like things to buy, especially as a woman, like the way you have to look. So it's more relevant now than ever to kind of dictate your own media, and I feel like collectivising in the form of zine making is quite a good way to do that. And if you see, like in the Girl Zine Library, a lot of these magazines, they're not 100% DIY, but they're still, some of them look quite polished, because it's a lot easier to make polished looking zines. But the important thing is people, like women, trans, non-binary people, dictating their own narratives.
I think Hermitage Road became a scene because it was very close to the cricketers, which seemed to be a focal point for all sorts of people, counterculture, political, people who sold socialist workers, not because they were party members, but because there was a ban on selling anything political in the high street. So it was sort of bravado, really. But it became very successful, which led to sort of an informal socialist group that met around at the railway. And from that we picked up this guy, Terry, who started to live with us, who was a bit of a poet. So there was sort of influences in the Southend poetry group. And then we started a Precinct press, because we had a little food co-op. We bought wholesale from community suppliers up in Thomas Square, and anything we made on it, we sort of invested in this community magazine. And we bought sort of plate maker and things like that, and every now and then we'd do a run, and I don't know how many, I think we only did about 3 or 4 copies, but it sort of just drew sort of arts, counterculture, politics, community politics. It's very embryonic in those days. I think there had previously been an attempt with something called Mushroom, that I don't know how many that went into. But there was sort of Animal Aid, and I don't know, there was various groups of people, and it became a focal point. And I think from that it kind of coalesced or went out into Saga, which was Southend Action Group for the Arts. It's sort of difficult to differentiate. They sort of flowed in and out of one another. And I think from that, the question of using the Queen's Hotel and as a venue, and various, free music improvisers. And I suppose we also were involved with sort of Red Square, who were kind of in our orbit as well. So there was all that going on, free dancing, their music, and obviously Trevor Taylor, was part of that. So there was quite a vibrant scene, and I can't remember the dates exactly, but I can remember sort of being able to do the, I think a 13-piece percussion bit by Stockhausen, I think, and some street theatre in Southend. So I think it was taking this nice conservative place where we had a lady councillor who was censoring films, and so it was a real time of, I don't know, changes, I think. I'm not sure we did it, but we were certainly wanting to influence it. Yeah.
My name's Sophia Rawlinson, and I wrote and produced Noisy Fanzine from 2005 to 2009. I think, to be honest, I'd been involved with fanzines pretty much since I was a teenager, so it was probably about maybe 5-8 years, something like that, since I first came into contact with fanzines. And I'd been to see a couple of local bands in the Southend area and just sort of thought, well, it would be nice to tell other people about what was happening, and for me, one of the ways I knew to do that was through a fanzine. So that's the main reason. The philosophy behind it, if you want to use that term, would be really just to spread the word about what was happening in Southend and obviously Essex itself.
So what was the kind of scene like around that time? You know, the bands that were playing, venues, and
there were a lot of venues. I mean, I still am based in Benfleet, and I thought that if I only sort of focused on that area or Southend, it would be not really big enough, which is why I extended it to Essex, really. But I mean, one of the bands that I was very interested in at the time was a band called Trash Munro, and they were sort of cross between metal and rock, female vocals, really quite good. There was ever such a lot. Obviously, you had at Chinnery's on a Friday and Saturday night. You had sort of like the 4 unsigned or local bands playing, and that was packed out back there. You know, I'm talking about sort of 2005, 2006. It was really quite busy there. It was obviously before the railway became really the go-to place for Southend alternative music. So you had Club Riga, like the Cricketers, lots of pubs. You had there was a restaurant in Benfleet on the big Hadley roundabout that had a club there. I've forgotten its name, but they were playing music. Lots of places really for unsigned bands to play, and quite a lot of interest really.
So the first issue of Amon Spek came out in, what did I say, March 79, and it was a landscape format that I photocopied at the library on these really old school photocopiers that were the paper was on a roll, and they had a very chemical smell, and you could only print on one side of the paper. So this was before plain paper copiers. And it was just 20 pages A5. It was mostly written and drawn by me, but there were some strips in there. One was written by a guy called Steve Campion. So we kind of got together, and came up with the idea of putting a strip zine out. Graham came up with the name Amon Spek, but it was kind of soon got left to me to actually drive the thing forward and put it together. And so it really became my baby after that.
When my students started coming back from their interviews at university, I found out that a lot of the girls were being asked, are you an Essex? Oh, so I see you're an Essex girl, which always puts them on the back foot, because they either go, well, yes, I am, actually, and laugh, thereby confirming it, or they go, actually, I find that stereotype offensive, and the interviewer just goes, oh, I've got the right one here, or, combative, or whatever. And I just thought, this is ridiculous, we need to start changing it, we need to start challenging this stereotype, because I'd been brought up here, obviously, in the 80s, when it had been in its heyday, I guess you'd say. And then coming back, I was just amazed when they started coming back, because I was thinking, really, is it still going on? So I started writing articles here about, in level 4, about why is it Essex? Why is it Essex? Because if you go out on the streets like Newcastle, Cardiff, Liverpool, you've got that kind of stereotyped look. A lot of the girls celebrate themselves with blonde hair and, you know, high heels and skirts and loads of makeup. It's not unique to Essex. So I started analysing why we were getting, why we had the label, and at the same time I was also researching. I was writing and researching my first, what was to become my first book, The Drowning Pool, where I looked at local sea witch called Syd Moore, and looked into the truth of her story. And I was also, looking at Matthew Hopkins. I'm just looking at this date actually. It's April 2010. I must have been thinking about writing it then. And whilst I was doing all of this research, I found out that when I looked at the characteristics of the Essex women who had been accused of witchcraft, and there were a lot, there was more than any other county that we are aware of. But obviously we've got a really good records office as well. Other places haven't got as thorough records, so there may be more cases in other places, but we don't know. But we have got hundreds more cases than most other counties. And as I started to research them and look at the different witch trials and look at the testimony and look at the ages as well and the women, I started to realise that there were characteristics that they shared with the stereotype.
We featured the Richard Montgomery on the first cover of the first issue of Bang with a cartoon, because it was hitting the news at that stage, and we were well aware at that stage that here was a ship full of unspent explosives somewhere in the Thames, which, if it did go up, could cause some damage to both Southend and the oil jetties off Canby. So we decided that would be a suitable name for a magazine which was indeed aimed at dealing with the arts. There were a number of people who were primarily at that stage involved with the poetry in Southend, and some of the names you've already mentioned there: Terry, Jane, Sylvia King, John Vidler, of course. And we'd been involved in setting up a festival in 1976 or 77, I think it was, which was an open door arts festival. And we'd been dealing with the literary side, the poetry side of that festival. And we decided it was time we produced a magazine in Southend, not only to give Southend writers some sort of outlet, but also to invite a few people from outside the area to contribute their poetry to Bang, so that we could effectively sort of show what quality there was in Southend and how it matched what was outside.
Well, my name's Steve Pegrum. Grew up in Southend, and I ran some fanzines locally, played in some bands, ran a club, and I still run a local indie label now.
Okay, and what did it mean to you to be a punk in the late 1970s, early 80s?
Well, the answer to that, the succinct answer, is that it meant everything, really, because like a lot of people my age, I was 13, 14, very young when punk really hit me, and that was the classic thing of the Pistols on So It Goes, and I was the kid that was inspired to go out and rip his blazer, put safety pins on it, and fully immerse myself in the sort of closed lifestyle of it, really, and hated school, found it a really violent, horrible time, and through the local punk scene I made a lot of friends that I found really inspirational, and consequently people, I think, don't quite appreciate what a sort of thriving scene Southend had from I'd say late 70s through certainly through the era I know to the mid 80s, it really was a very, very creative time. Many bands were playing the whole time. You get bands coming down from London and elsewhere to play, and then as the scene evolved, it just mushroomed really. So yeah, very, very healthy time around then.